The words cut deeper than any wound I've ever known, sharper than the grief of losing my husband, more bitter than the loneliness of widowhood. "Your old mom. Stop acting like you matter." My son David said that to me, his voice cold as a January wind, standing in the kitchen where I'd kneaded dough for his birthday cakes, wiped his tears, and dreamed of a family that would always hold me close. I'm Evelyn Harper, 68 years old, a retired school teacher with gray hair and hands that still remember the weight of chalk. I never imagined my only child, the boy I'd carried through fevers and heartaches, would look at me like I was nothing, a burden to be swept away. His wife Melissa stood behind him. Her arms crossed her lips, curled in a smirk that said she'd already won a war I hadn't realized we were fighting. They wanted me gone out of the house I'd built with my late husband Robert, the house that held every memory of our love, our struggles, our life. To them, I was a ghost clinging to a world that no longer needed me. I was born in a small town outside Raleigh, North Carolina, where the air smells of pine and the summers hum with cicadas. My parents were farmers, simple folks who taught me to work hard and love fiercely. I met Robert at 19, a carpenter with hands rough as oak but gentle when he held me. We married young, built this house, white clapboard, 2 stories with a porch, where we'd watch fireflies dance. It was modest, but ours paid off with every penny we scraped together. We raised David here, pouring our hearts into giving him a good life, baseball games, college tuition, a home filled with laughter. I taught for 30 years, shaping young minds in a classroom where chalk dust settled on my fingers like a second skin. I loved it the way a child's eyes lit up when they solved a problem, the letters they'd write years later, thanking me for believing in them. Robert used to say I was born to teach, that I had a gift for making people feel seen. Evie. He'd say, his voice warm as a summer night, "You're my North Star." When he died 10 years ago, a heart attack stealing him in the night, I thought the worst pain was behind me. I was wrong. David was 35 then, married to Melissa, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. They moved in after Robert's death, saying it was to help me cope. I believed them grateful for their presence in a house that felt too big without Robert's laughter. I cooked their dinners, folded their laundry, babysat their boys, Ethan and Liam, when Melissa launched her real estate business. I thought we were a family, holding each other up through grief. But over the years, I felt the shift slow and insidious. David stopped asking about my day, his hugs growing brief, perfunctory. Melissa's thank yous turned to sighs, then silence, as if my efforts were an inconvenience. My grandsons, once eager to climb into my lap for stories of pirates and faraway lands, now barely looked up from their phones, their eyes rolling when I spoke. I told myself it was just life that families drift. I didn't see the truth until that day in the kitchen 3 months ago when David's words shattered the illusion I'd clung to. It was a Sunday, the kind of muggy afternoon where the air feels thick with secrets. I'd spent the morning baking blueberry muffins, David's favorite since he was a boy, hoping we'd sit together, maybe talk like we used to when he'd tell me about his dreams. Instead, he came downstairs with Melissa, their faces set like stone, their eyes avoiding mine. "Mom," he said, his voice clipped, not even glancing at the muffins cooling on the counter. "We need to talk about the house." My heart sank, a cold weight settling in my chest, but I nodded, wiping flour from my hands, my apron suddenly feeling like a shield too thin to protect me. He went on, his words rehearsed, saying they needed space, that the boys were growing, that Melissa's business was booming. "We're thinking of selling," he said, his tone flat as if it were a done deal. "You can move into a nice senior home, somewhere appropriate." Appropriate. The word stung like a slap, reducing me to a problem to be solved, a piece of clutter to be cleared away. I looked at him. My boy, the one I'd rocked through nightmares, cheered at every home run sent to college with every dime we had. His face was closed, unfamiliar, as if the son I'd known had been replaced by this stranger. "This is my home," I said, my voice trembling barely above a whisper. That's when he said it, those words that still burn in my chest. "Your old mom. Stop acting like you matter." The kitchen spun, the scent of blueberries turning sickly sweet, mocking me. Melissa chimed in, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "Evelyn, let's be realistic. You're not contributing anymore. You're just in the way. In the way." Me who'd given them everything, my time, my love, my home. I wanted to scream to remind them this house was in my name, that Robert and I had paid it off before David was born, that the deed sat upstairs in a safe, untouched. But the words wouldn't come. Shame choked me hot and bitter, wrapping around my throat like a vine. Had I become so small, so invisible, that my own son saw me as nothing? I stood there frozen, the muffins untouched, the clock on the wall, ticking louder than it ever had. I thought of Robert, how he'd have looked at David with that quiet disappointment that cut deeper than anger. I thought of my students, the ones who'd written me letters calling me their hero. Was I still that woman? Or had time and grief and neglect whittled me down to a shadow? I managed to nod, to mumble something about needing time, and fled to my bedroom, the one I'd shared with Robert, where his cedar aftershave still lingered in my mind, though I knew it was just memory playing tricks. I sat on the quilt he'd loved, its patches faded from years of use, and cried not the loud sobs of youth, but the silent, bone-deep tears of someone who's lost too much. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as if the house itself were mourning with me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying David's words, Melissa's smirk, the way my grandsons hadn't even been there to see their grandmother crumble. I thought of my mother who'd faced her own betrayals, a sister who'd cheated her out of inheritance, a husband who'd left before I was born, and how she'd carried on her back straight, her hands always busy. "You're stronger than you know, Evie," she'd say, her voice rough but kind. I didn't feel strong. I felt broken, discarded like a book no one wanted to read anymore. But as I lay there, the stars visible through the window, I remembered something Robert used to say: "The stars are promises, Evie. Each one's a chance for tomorrow." I clung to that, a fragile thread in the dark. The next morning I woke with a heaviness that made my bones ache. David and Melissa acted as if nothing had happened, talking loudly about their plans over breakfast, not even glancing my way. I moved through the house like a stranger, washing dishes, folding towels, each task a reminder of how little they valued me. But as I scrubbed their plates, I kept thinking about the deed locked away upstairs, my name written in ink as permanent as my love for this house. They didn't know. They thought I'd signed it over years ago when they moved in to make things easier. I hadn't. Something instinct maybe, or Robert's voice in my heart had stopped me whispering to hold on. I didn't tell them, not then. But in that moment, a spark flickered inside me, faint but stubborn like a candle refusing to go out. I started noticing the small ways they'd erased me. Melissa had redecorated without asking, replacing my mother's china with sleek modern plates that gleamed under the kitchen lights. David never mentioned Robert anymore, as if his father's memory was an inconvenience, a relic like me. My grandsons parroted their mother's tone, rolling their eyes when I offered to read to them their grandma pleas, dripping with impatience. Each slight was a cut, small but deep, carving away at the woman I'd been. I felt like an intruder in my own home, tiptoeing around their lives, my footsteps too loud, my presence too much. But that spark, that stubborn flicker, wouldn't die. It whispered to me in the quiet moments when the house was still and the moon cast shadows across my quilt. It told me I wasn't done, that I had a story left to tell. One afternoon I walked to the mailbox, a task I'd always loved for its simplicity. The crunch of gravel under my shoes grounding me. The street was quiet, lined with oaks older than I was, their branches swaying in the breeze. At the end of the driveway, I saw Clara, my neighbor, tending her roses, her straw hat tilted against the sun. She was 72, widowed like me, with a laugh that could chase away the darkest clouds. She waved me over her hands dusted with soil, her eyes kind but piercing. "Evelyn, you look like you're carrying the world," she said, her voice soft but direct. I tried to smile to brush it off, but something broke a dam I'd built to hold back the pain. I told her everything, David's words, Melissa's smirk, the way my home no longer felt like mine. I told her about the deed, the secret I hadn't shared with anyone, my voice trembling with fear and defiance. Clara listened, her face soft but fierce, her hands still on her pruning shears. When I finished, she took my hand, her grip warm and steady. "You're not invisible, Evelyn," she said. "Not to me, and not to yourself if you remember who you are." Her words were a lifeline, a rope tossed into the dark water I'd been drowning in. That night, I sat on the porch, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and looked at the stars. Robert's promises glittered above each one, a reminder that I wasn't finished. I thought of my classroom, the children who'd trusted me, the letters they'd written. I thought of my mother's strength, Robert's love, Clara's faith. The deed was still mine, a truth they couldn't erase. I didn't know how to fight for myself, not yet, but Clara's voice and that spark inside me told me I had to try. I wasn't ready to face David, to wield the power I held, but I was ready to start to take one step toward the woman I'd been, the woman I could still be. The road ahead was uncertain, but as I sat there, the stars bright and the night soft, I knew I wouldn't let my son's words be the end of my story. The days after David's words in the kitchen stretched into a gray fog, each one blurring into the next heavy, with a silence that felt like betrayal. I moved through the house like a guest who'd forgotten how to belong, my steps soft, my hands trembling when I reached for the kettle or folded a towel. My reflection in the hall mirror startled me. Gray hair pulled tight eyes dulled by grief, the lines on my face deeper than I remembered. "I'm Evelyn Harper," I'd think, as if reminding myself I still existed, but the name felt hollow, like a song I'd forgotten the tune to. "Stop acting like you matter," David had said, and those words clung to me, a cruel echo that followed me from the kitchen to the bedroom, from dawn to dusk. Yet Clara's voice, fierce and kind, lingered too, a whisper that refused to let me sink entirely. "You're not invisible," she'd said, and I held on to that fragile, as it was like a thread keeping me tethered to the world. I stopped baking the act too painful in a kitchen that no longer felt mine. The counters, once dusted with flour and love, were now Melissa's domain, crowded with her gleaming coffee maker and jars of organic spices. She'd erased my presence, replacing my chipped mugs with sleek ones, my handwritten recipes with glossy cookbooks. I'd hear her on the phone, her voice bright as she charmed clients, while I sat in the living room unnoticed, my hands idle in my lap. David was no better. He'd come home from his accounting job, kiss Melissa, ruffle Ethan and Liam's hair, and pass me without a word, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd grown used to ignoring. My grandsons, once my little shadows, were strangers now. Ethan, 12, and Liam, 10, would scoff when I suggested a game or a story, their eyes glued to screens, their voices sharp with impatience. "That's boring," Grandma Liam said once, and I felt the sting as if he'd slapped me. I didn't argue, just nodded and retreated, my heart aching for the boys who'd once begged for my tales of adventure. Loneliness is a quiet predator creeping in when you're not looking, wrapping its tendrils around your heart until you forget how to breathe. I'd sit by the window watching the world outside, neighbors walking dogs, children chasing each other, the oak trees swaying in the Carolina breeze, and feel like I was watching a life I no longer belonged to. I thought of Robert, how he'd always known when I was slipping. He'd pull me close, his calloused hands warm, and say, "Evie, you're my North Star. You always find your way." But Robert was gone, and the family I'd poured my soul into saw me as a burden, a relic to be boxed up and forgotten. I wondered if I'd failed them, had I loved too fiercely or not enough. Had I given so much of myself that I'd left nothing for me? One morning, desperate for something to hold on to, I climbed to the attic, the air thick with dust and memory. The light slanted through a small window, illuminating boxes I hadn't touched in years. I opened one and found my old teaching supplies lesson plans, scribbled in my looping handwriting, a stack of student thank you notes, a worn copy of Charlotte's Web I'd read to every class. I traced the book's cover, remembering the way children's faces would glow at the story of friendship and sacrifice, their gasps when Charlotte spun her web. Tucked inside was a letter from a student, Sarah, dated 1998. Dear Mrs. Harper, it read, "You made me believe I could be anything. I'm going to college because of you." Tears blurred the ink hot and sudden. I'd forgotten how it felt to matter, to be seen, to change a life. I slipped the letter into my pocket, a small shield against the ache, and sat there surrounded by relics of a woman I barely recognized. That afternoon, I walked to Clara's house, needing her warmth like a starving woman needs bread. She was in her garden pruning her roses, the scent sharp and sweet in the humid air. Her straw hat cast a shadow over her face, but her eyes were bright when she saw me. "Evelyn, come help me with these thorns," she said, handing me a pair of gloves. No questions asked. We worked side by side, the earth cool under my fingers, the rhythm of clipping and planting grounding me. I told her about the attic, the letter, the way my heart felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. I told her about David's words, Melissa's cruelty, the deed I hadn't mentioned to anyone but her. Clara listened, her hands steady her silence, a safe harbor. When I finished, she looked at me, her eyes fierce with something I couldn't name. "Evelyn," she said, "you're not just a mother or a widow. You're a woman who's touched lives mine, those kids Roberts. Don't let anyone, not even your son, make you forget that." Her words were a spark in the dark, faint but persistent. I carried them home where the tension was thicker than ever. Melissa had started leaving real estate brochures on the counter, circled with senior living homes, their glossy pages promising carefree living and community. Each one was a silent demand for me to vanish, to pack my life into a suitcase and fade away. David didn't mention selling the house again, but his silence was worse, heavy with resignation, as if I were already gone. One evening, I overheard them in the living room, their voices low but sharp. "She's not even trying to help herself," Melissa said, her tone dripping with disdain. "She just sits there taking up space." David sighed a sound that cut deeper than words. "I know. But what can we do? She's my mom." His voice wasn't kind. It was tired, like I was a chore he'd rather avoid. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding, and realized they didn't just want me out. They wanted me erased, my existence, a footnote in their ambitious lives. Something stirred in me, then small but undeniable, like a seed cracking open in the dark. I couldn't keep living like this, shrinking to fit their indifference, letting their cruelty define me. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I pulled out my easel. Painting had been my joy before marriage, before motherhood, before life demanded I set it aside for others. In the attic, I found my old canvases, the brushes stiff but salvageable, their bristles holding the ghost of colors I'd once loved. I set up in the spare room where the light was soft through the lace curtains and started with a simple sketch, a single rose like the ones Clara grew its petals bold against a stormy sky. My hands shook at first, unsteady with doubt, but as the lines took shape, I felt a flicker of the woman I'd been, the one who dreamed in vermilion and ochre. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a quiet rebellion against the voices that told me I was nothing. I didn't tell anyone, not David, not Melissa, not even Clara. The act felt too fragile, like a secret I needed to protect from their judgment. But each stroke of the brush was a refusal to disappear, a way of painting myself back into existence. I'd work in the mornings when the house was empty, losing myself in colors, crimson sapphire, the deep green of summer leaves. Sometimes I'd cry as I painted tears mixing with the pigment, but I didn't stop. It was as if I was reclaiming my voice, one petal, one shadow at a time. The rose grew bolder, its thorns sharp, its colors defiant, and with it so did I. Clara noticed the change before anyone else. One afternoon she invited me for tea, her kitchen warm with the scent of chamomile and the clink of her favorite teacups. "You've got a spark again, Evelyn," she said, her smile soft, but knowing her eyes searching mine. "What's got you glowing?" I hesitated, then told her about the painting, the rose, the way it felt like breathing after years underwater. She clapped her hands, her laugh, bright as sunlight. "That's it," she said. "That's you coming back to yourself." She told me about a local art group she'd joined, mostly women our age who met to paint, talk, and laugh, their hands stained with color and courage. "Come with me next week," she urged, her voice insistent but kind. "Just try it." I wanted to say no, to hide behind my fear, but her faith in me was a mirror reflecting a woman I was starting to recognize again. I nodded, my heart racing, but my resolve growing. That night, I lay awake, the house quiet, except for the creak of the floorboards and the hum of memories. I thought of the art group, the rose on my canvas, Sarah's letter in my pocket. I thought of the deed still locked in the safe, my name a silent truth. David and Melissa couldn't touch. They didn't know, and I wasn't ready to tell them not yet. But the spark Clara saw, the one I felt in my brushstrokes, was growing steady as a heartbeat. It wasn't loud or bold, not like the anger that sometimes flared in my chest, hot and fierce. It was quiet, persistent whispering that I was still Evelyn Harper, still worth fighting for. I didn't know where it would lead, but as I stared at the ceiling, the stars faint through the window, I knew I was ready to find out. The morning of the art group meeting, I woke with a flutter in my chest, a mix of dread and something lighter. Something I hadn't felt in years, hope perhaps fragile as a new leaf. I stood before my closet, staring at the rows of muted cardigans and practical skirts I'd worn to blend into the background to avoid being a bother. My fingers lingered on a blouse I hadn't touched in a decade, soft blue cotton with tiny embroidered daisies, a gift from Robert on our 20th anniversary. He'd said it matched my eyes, that it made me look like the girl he'd fallen for under the Carolina stars. I slipped it on the fabric, cool against my skin, and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the ghost I'd seen these past months. She was Evelyn Harper, hesitant, but standing her gray hair loose, her eyes catching the light. I touched the daisies, remembering Robert's smile, and felt a spark of his strength, like a whisper across time. Clara picked me up at 10, her old station wagon rattling down the street, the radio humming a tune from our youth. She grinned when she saw the blouse, her eyes twinkling. "Look at you, Evelyn, shining already," she said, and I felt a warmth spread through me like sunlight after a long winter. The art group met at a community center a few miles away, a low brick building with ivy climbing its walls and windows that glowed with morning light. Inside, a dozen women, most in their 60s and 70s, sat around easels, their laughter filling the room like a melody. They welcomed me with smiles and quick hugs, their hands stained with paint, their eyes free of judgment. Ruth, the organizer, was a painter with silver hair and a voice warm as honey. She handed me a canvas, her smile encouraging. "No rules here, Evelyn," she said. "Just paint what's in your heart." I started with another rose, but this one was bolder, its petals unfurling in shades of crimson and gold, as if reaching for a sun it hadn't seen in years. The act felt like a confession, each stroke a piece of myself I was reclaiming. As I painted, the women shared their stories, some light, some heavy, of children who'd drifted away, husbands who'd passed dreams they'd tucked into boxes and forgotten. Marjorie, a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, told me about her daughter who'd stopped calling after a fight over money. "I thought I'd lost her forever," she said, her brush steady, despite the tremble in her words. but I found myself again here with these colors. Her story hit me like a wave, washing away some of the shame I'd carried. I wasn't alone. These women with their lined faces and vibrant spirits were proof that life didn't end when others stopped seeing you. I drove home that day with paint under my nails and a lightness in my chest, as if I'd shed a layer of grief. For the first time in months, I'd spent hours without hearing David's voice in my head, without feeling Melissa's smirk like a blade. But the moment I stepped into the house, the weight returned, heavier than ever. Melissa was in the living room flipping through a new brochure, this one for a retirement village, with photos of seniors playing cards under fluorescent lights. She didn't look up as I passed, but her voice followed me, cool and deliberate. "Evelyn, we're meeting with a realtor next week. You should start packing." My stomach twisted a knot of fear and anger, but I didn't respond. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding, and locked myself in the spare room where my easel stood like a sentinel. I painted late into the night, the rose giving way to something wilder, a storm-swept sea waves crashing against a lone lighthouse, its beam cutting through the dark. It was raw, messy, but it was me, my anger, my grief, my stubborn hope. As the brush moved, I thought of the deed again, locked in the safe upstairs, my name next to Robert's, a promise we'd made to each other. David and Melissa didn't know, thought I'd signed it over years ago when they moved in. I hadn't, and that secret was my shield, a truth they couldn't touch. I thought of Sarah's letter, of the children I'd taught, of Robert's belief in me. The lighthouse grew brighter on the canvas, its light defiant, and I felt a shift inside me, a spark growing into a flame. The next day, I did something I hadn't planned, something that felt reckless but right. I called a lawyer, not the family attorney David used, but a woman Ruth had mentioned, someone who specialized in estate planning. Her name was Linda, and her voice on the phone was calm but strong, like she'd heard stories like mine before. I made an appointment for the following week, telling no one, not even Clara, the secrecy, both thrilling and heavy. It felt like a betrayal planning behind my son's back, but I saw Melissa's brochures in my mind, David's cold eyes, and knew I had to protect myself. I needed to understand my rights to hold on to what was mine, my home, my dignity, my life. At home, the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter each day. David started dropping hints about the house, casual remarks about updating or maximizing value, as if I weren't sitting right there listening. Melissa was bolder, leaving moving boxes in the hallway, my name scrawled on them in her sharp handwriting, a silent command to disappear. I ignored them, focusing on my painting on the art group, on the small ways I was stitching myself back together. One afternoon, Ethan wandered into the spare room while I was adding whitecaps to the sea. He stood in the doorway, his lanky frame hesitant, watching me work. "That's pretty good, Grandma," he said, his voice soft, almost shy. For a moment, I saw the boy. He'd been the one who'd curled up next to me for stories, his eyes wide with wonder. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, my throat tight with love and pain. He lingered, then left without another word, but that moment was a crack in the wall between us, a sliver of light in the dark. Clara noticed the change in me, her sharp eyes missing nothing. We'd started taking walks together, looping through the neighborhood as the leaves turned gold and red, the air crisp with autumn's promise. One evening, as we passed the old oak at the corner, she stopped and looked at me, her face soft but fierce. "You're stronger than you know, Evelyn," she said, her voice steady. "I see it in your eyes. Whatever you're planning, don't let fear stop you." I hadn't told her about the lawyer, but Clara had a way of seeing through me, her intuition sharper than any words. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her belief, even if I wasn't sure I deserved it yet. The art group became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe. Each week I painted something new, a field of wildflowers under a stormy sky, a child's face lit with laughter, a starry night that reminded me of Robert's promises. The women cheered me on their voices, drowning out the ones in my head that whispered I was too old, too broken. Ruth suggested I bring a piece to the town's autumn art fair, a small event where locals sold crafts and paintings. "You've got talent, Evelyn," she said, her eyes bright with encouragement. "Let people see it." I laughed it off, the idea, terrifying, but it took root, fragile but persistent, like a seed in rocky soil. I thought of the lighthouse of Sarah's letter of the deed upstairs. Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could be seen. At home, I kept my paintings hidden, my plans secret, moving through the house like a woman guarding a flame in a storm. David and Melissa were too caught up in their own world to notice late-night talks about downsizing meetings with realtors, their voices loud with certainty. They thought I was beaten, that I'd pack my bags and fade into their version of my story. But every brushstroke, every step toward Linda's office, every moment with Clara and the art group was a rebellion, a quiet refusal to disappear. I thought of my mother, her hands always busy, her heart unbroken despite betrayal. I thought of Robert, his North Star, his faith in me. The deed was still mine, a truth they couldn't erase, and the spark inside me was growing no longer a flicker, but a steady glow whispering that I was still here, still Evelyn, still worth fighting for. The night before my meeting with Linda, I sat on the porch, the air cool with the edge of fall, the stars bright above. I thought of the art group, the lighthouse on my canvas, Ethan's shy compliment. I thought of the deed, my name in ink, a promise Robert and I had made to each other. David and Melissa didn't know, and I wasn't ready to tell them not yet, but I was ready to keep going, to keep painting, to keep claiming the pieces of myself I'd lost. The spark was a flame now, steady and warm, and as I looked at the stars, Robert's promises shining down, I knew I wasn't letting it go. The lawyer's office was a small, orderly haven tucked in, downtown Raleigh, its walls lined with leather-bound books, and a window framing a courtyard where sparrows danced among dogwood blossoms. Linda, younger than I'd pictured, maybe in her mid-40s, had a sharp bob and eyes that seemed to see straight to the heart of things. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap, the blue daisy blouse giving me a courage I was still learning to trust. I poured out my story. David's cruel words, Melissa's brochures, the way my home, my sanctuary was being stripped from me. I told her about the deed locked in the safe, my name alone since Robert and I paid off the mortgage decades ago. Her pen moved across a notepad, steady and sure as she listened, her face calm but attentive. When I finished, she leaned back, her gaze warm but resolute. "Evelyn," she said, "you're not powerless. That deed is your foundation. Let's build on it to protect you." We spent over an hour exploring options, trusts, wills, property laws I'd never needed to understand before. Linda suggested transferring the house into a trust with me as the sole trustee, ensuring I held the reins to its future. "It's not about shutting David out," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's about securing your place." I nodded my heart, a tangle of guilt and determination. David was my son, the boy I'd sung to sleep, but he'd wounded me in ways I never thought possible. I thought of Robert, his hands shaping this house, his trust in me to carry on. I couldn't let it slip away, not like this, not to a son who saw me as a burden and a daughter-in-law who saw me as an obstacle. Driving home, the world felt sharper, as if a veil had lifted. The pines along the road stood taller, their needles catching the sunlight, and the sky was a blue so vivid it made my chest ache. I stopped at a hardware store on impulse, buying a new lock for the spare room door, the one guarding my easel and my paintings. It was a small act, but when I installed it that evening, turning the key with a soft click, I felt a piece of myself snap back into place. This was my space, my art, my heart. I wasn't invisible, not anymore, and this lock was a quiet vow to protect what was mine. The art group became my refuge, a place where I could breathe without the weight of David's words or Melissa's smirks. Each week I brought a new painting, each one bolder, as if my soul was spilling onto the canvas. The lighthouse gave way to a woman standing in a field, her face tilted to the sun, her hands open to catch its warmth. Ruth called it radiant, and the other women nodded their eyes bright with pride. I started to see myself in those colors, not the weary widow or the discarded mother, but a woman with fire in her veins, a woman who'd survived loss and betrayal and was still here, still creating. Ruth kept nudging me toward the Autumn Art Fair, a local event where artists sold their work under the town's oak-lined square. "Your voice belongs out there, Evelyn," she said, squeezing my hand. I hesitated, fear whispering that I wasn't ready, but the idea took root, a fragile seed in my heart. At home, I moved with a new purpose, no longer tiptoeing around Melissa's boxes or apologizing for existing. I cooked for myself, again, simple dishes like tomato soup with basil from the garden cornbread, baked in the cast-iron skillet Robert had loved, savoring the act of nourishing my body, my soul. One evening, David watched me set the table for one, his brow furrowed, not with concern, but with something like unease. "You're different lately," he said, his voice low, almost suspicious. I met his eyes, calm and steady, the woman from my painting, staring back at him. "Maybe I'm just remembering who I am." I said my words soft but waited. He didn't reply, but I saw a flicker of doubt in his face, and it felt like a victory, small but undeniable, a crack in the wall he'd built between us. Clara saw the change, too, her sharp eyes missing nothing. We'd started having tea every Sunday, a ritual that anchored me. Her kitchen warm with the scent of chamomile and the clink of her mother's teacups. One afternoon, she reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. "You're blooming, Evelyn," she said, her voice thick with emotion, like one of my roses after a hard frost. I told her about the lawyer, the lock, the art fair, my voice steady but my heart racing. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, a grin spreading across her face. "Good," she said. "Let them see you're not going anywhere." She pulled out a photo album, its pages filled with snapshots of her life, her husband, her children, her garden in every season. "This is what keeps me going," she said, pointing to a picture of her standing by her roses, her face alight. "The proof I've lived. Find your proof, Evelyn, and hold it tight." Her words echoed in me. And that night, I returned to the attic, the air thick with dust and memory. I found a box of Robert's things, his carpenter's tools, their handles worn smooth, a leather journal filled with his slanted handwriting, a watch he'd worn every day, its face scratched, but still ticking faintly. I slipped the watch onto my wrist, its weight grounding me too big but perfect, like Robert was holding my hand again. I opened his journal and found a note tucked inside Evie. "You're my strength. Never forget it." Tears fell, not heavy with grief, but light cleansing like rain after a drought. I wore the watch every day after that, its ticking a quiet rebellion against the family who wanted me gone, a reminder of the woman Robert had loved, the woman I was fighting to become. The art fair was 2 weeks away, and I threw myself into preparing my heart, pounding with nerves, but also excitement. I chose the woman in the field for the fair, framing it myself, in a simple wood frame that felt like something Robert would have crafted, its grain warm under my fingers. I practiced what I'd say if someone asked about it, though the thought of standing beside my work exposed to strangers' eyes made my stomach churn. At the same time, I met with Linda again, finalizing the trust that locked the house under my control. She drafted papers for my will, urging me to think about my legacy. I spent nights pondering that Robert's journal open beside me, his watch ticking on my wrist. I didn't want to punish David, but I couldn't reward his cruelty. I thought of Ethan and Liam, of the flicker of connection I'd felt with Ethan over my painting. I added a clause to the will, leaving a portion of my savings to the community center, where the art group met, a place that had given me back my voice, my purpose. One morning, I overheard Melissa on the phone, her voice sharp with frustration. "She's not budging," she said, pacing the kitchen. I don't know what's gotten into her. I realized she was talking about me, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear or shame. I felt pride, fierce and bright. They'd underestimated me, but I was waking up my roots, digging deeper into the life I was reclaiming. I thought of Ethan's shy compliment of Clara's roses, of the woman in my painting reaching for the sun. I was still Evelyn Harper, and I was done shrinking. The day of the art fair dawned golden and crisp, the kind of autumn morning that promises new beginnings. Clara drove me to the town square where booths stood under a canopy of red and orange leaves, the air alive with chatter and the scent of cider. My painting hung in the community center's booth, its colors glowing in the sunlight, the woman's face radiant with hope. I stood beside it, Robert's watch, heavy on my wrist, my heart racing but my head high. People stopped to look, some smiling, some asking questions about my process, my inspiration. A woman my age with kind eyes and a soft southern drawl bought it on the spot, saying it reminded her of her own journey through loss. "There's strength in this." She set her hand on my arm, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness but of joy of being seen. Driving home, Clara turned to me, her face alight. "You did it, Evelyn. You showed them." I laughed a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years, bright and free. The house was still mine, the deed untouched, the trust in place. David and Melissa didn't know, but they would soon enough. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, but I was ready to keep growing, to keep painting, to keep claiming the life I'd almost lost. The spark inside me was a flame now burning steady and bright, and as we drove through the fading light, the oaks casting long shadows, I knew I wasn't letting anyone snuff it out. The weeks following the art fair carried a quiet energy, like a river carving its path through stone, steady and unstoppable. I woke each morning with a hunger to create, my fingers itching for the weight of a paintbrush, my mind alight with colors and shapes that felt like pieces of my soul. The spare room, once a forgotten corner of the house, had transformed into my sanctuary, its walls lined with canvases that told stories I'd long buried, fields of wildflowers bending under stormy skies, a woman dancing alone in moonlight, a single oak standing firm against a howling wind. Each stroke was a reclamation, a bold declaration that I was still here, still Evelyn Harper, still mattering. Robert's watch ticked on my wrist, its scratched face a reminder of the woman he'd loved, the woman I was learning to love again, and I wore it like a talisman, its weight grounding me through the uncertainty. At home, the air was thick with a tension that had shifted from subtle to oppressive. David and Melissa moved around me like I was an obstacle they hadn't yet figured out how to remove. The moving boxes with my name scrawled on them still sat in the hallway untouched, a silent challenge I refused to answer. Melissa's brochures had multiplied now, stacked defiantly on the kitchen counter, their glossy pages touting active senior communities, with images of strangers smiling under harsh lights. She'd stopped being coy, leaving notes with deadlines, call by Tuesday or tour scheduled as if I were a tenant to be evicted. I'd pick them up, read them, and set them back down. My face calm, but my heart racing with a mix of fear and defiance. They thought they were winning, that I'd crumble under their pressure. They didn't know about the trust, the deed, the lawyer's papers tucked safely away in the spare room, locked behind the new bolt I'd installed. They didn't know I was building a fortress within myself, brick by quiet brick. Clara became my anchor, her friendship a beacon through the fog of betrayal. We'd walk the neighborhood at dusk, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves, and talk about everything: her roses, my paintings, the lives we'd lived, and the ones we still dreamed of. One evening, she told me about a trip she'd taken after her husband died, a solo journey to the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was terrified Evelyn. She admitted, her eyes distant but bright, her voice soft against the chirping crickets. But standing on that ridge, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold, I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to live to be whole. Her words sank deep, rooting in my heart like the oaks lining our street. I didn't need David's approval or Melissa's or anyone's. I was enough, and that realization was a quiet revolution reshaping me from the inside out. The art group was another lifeline pulling me deeper into the woman I was becoming. Ruth had started calling me our rising star, a nickname that made me blush, but secretly thrilled me, like a secret I was learning to believe. The women there were like sisters, each carrying her own wounds, but painting through them with courage and grace. Marjorie, who'd lost her daughter to a bitter fight, showed me a portrait she'd done of her younger self. Fierce and unafraid, her eyes blazing with dreams. "This is who I'm painting for," she said, her voice steady. "The girl I was and the woman I'm still becoming." Inspired, I started a new piece, a self-portrait, something I'd never dared before. I painted myself as I felt now, not young, but vibrant. My gray hair loose, my eyes alive with fire, standing in a garden of roses that bloomed despite the storm. It was bold, almost defiant, and every stroke felt like a vow to myself, a promise to keep fighting. Outside the art group, I began to stretch further, testing the boundaries of the life I was building. I joined a book club at the library where I met women who debated Jane Austen with the same passion I'd once poured into teaching their laughter, filling the room like music. I signed up for a gardening class with Clara, learning to coax life from soil, my hands stained with earth and pride as I planted herbs and flowers. These were small steps, but they were mine, each one a thread, weaving me back together stronger than before. I started wearing brighter colors scarves in emerald and crimson, a yellow cardigan that made Clara clap her hands in delight, her laughter echoing in her garden. David noticed his eyes narrowing one morning as I left for the library, my scarf trailing like a banner. "You're going out a lot," he said, his tone more curious than kind, a hint of suspicion in his voice. I smiled just a little, my heart steady. "I have a life to live," I said, and walked away before he could respond. The click of the door behind me, a small triumph. Linda the lawyer became another ally. Her calm professionalism, a steady hand guiding me through uncharted waters. We met again to review my finances savings from my teaching years, Robert's life insurance, a modest pension, and she suggested investing in something for myself, perhaps a studio space, or a fund for my art. The idea startled me, almost felt indulgent wrong. I'd spent so long giving everything to David, to the family, that spending on myself seemed like a betrayal. But as I sat in the spare room surrounded by my canvases, the lighthouse, the woman in the field, I realized she was right. I didn't need a studio yet, but I opened a separate account, transferring a portion of my savings, a nest egg that was mine alone, untouchable, a safety net for the future I was crafting with every brushstroke. One afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where Robert was buried, a quiet place shaded by pines, their needles soft underfoot. I knelt by his headstone, the granite cool against my fingers, and talked to him as I used to my voice low the wind carrying my words. I told him about David's betrayal, Melissa's boxes, the paintings that were saving me the trust that protected our home. I told him I was scared, but fighting that I wore his watch and was trying to be the woman he'd believed in. A breeze stirred the trees, and I felt him there, his presence steady as the ticking on my wrist. I left a single daisy on his grave, its white petals bright against the stone, a promise to keep going to honor the life we'd built together. Back home, the cracks in David and Melissa's confidence were beginning to show like fissures in a dam about to break. Melissa's voice was sharper now, her phone calls with the realtor tinged with frustration, her words clipped. "She's being difficult," I heard her say one night, pacing the living room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "We need to push harder." David was quieter, his silences heavier, as if he sensed something shifting but couldn't name it. I kept my routine painting, gardening, book club, art group, each act a quiet defiance, a brick in the wall I was building around my heart. I started leaving my sketchbook on the kitchen table, open to drawings of roses or lighthouses, a subtle reminder that I wasn't invisible. Liam noticed once flipping through it when he thought I wasn't looking, his small fingers tracing the lines. "You're really good, Grandma," he said, his voice soft, and I smiled, my heart aching for the boy he could be the one his parents were trying to mold into their image. The self-portrait was nearly finished, and I poured everything into it, my grief, my anger, my hope, my fire. When I showed it to the art group, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. Ruth's eyes wet as she hugged me. "This is your truth, Evelyn," she said, her voice thick. "Don't ever hide it." I decided to enter it in a regional art show, a larger event than the fair, with artists from across the state converging in Durham. The thought terrified me, my stomach knotting at the idea of exposing my soul to strangers, but it also thrilled me, a challenge I was ready to meet. I was ready to be seen not just by Clara or Ruth, but by the world, by myself. As the art show approached, I felt a tide turning inside me, a shift from surviving to thriving. I wasn't just holding on anymore. I was building, creating, living a life that didn't depend on David's approval or Melissa's permission. The deed, the trust, the will, they were my safety net. But my real strength was in the woman I was becoming, the one who painted storms and planted gardens, who wore bright scarves and Robert's watch with pride. I thought of Clara's sunrise, Marjorie's portrait, Robert's note in his journal, "Evie, you're my strength." I thought of the self-portrait, my face alive with fire, standing unbowed in a garden of roses. I was Evelyn Harper, and I was done being silent. The confrontation was coming. I could feel it like thunder on the horizon, but for now I was content to grow, to paint, to live. And when the time came, I'd be ready, my roots deep, my heart ablaze. The regional art show was held in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Durham, its high ceilings and exposed brick walls alive with the hum of creativity, the air thick with the scent of oil paint and possibility. My self-portrait hung in a quiet corner of the gallery, its vibrant colors catching the morning light, my painted eyes blazing with a fire I was still learning to claim. I stood beside it, Robert's watch, heavy on my wrist, my heart a wild mix of nerves and pride, the blue daisy blouse soft against my skin. Clara was there, her smile radiant, and Ruth and the art group women flanked me, their chatter a warm shield against the fear that whispered I didn't belong. Strangers paused to look, some lingering, some murmuring to each other, their eyes tracing the roses, the storm, the woman who refused to bow. A young woman, maybe in her 30s, stood before the painting for a long time, her face soft with emotion. "This feels like my grandmother," she said, her voice trembling, "like she's still fighting even after everything." I swallowed hard, knotting my throat tight. In that moment, I felt seen, not just as Evelyn, but as every woman who'd been told to fade, to shrink, to disappear. It was a gift, raw and unexpected, and it settled deep in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. The show was a triumph, not because I won a ribbon, though I did a small blue one for emotional impact that Ruth pinned to my scarf with a grin, but because I dared to stand there to claim my space in a world that had tried to erase me. Driving home with Clara, the ribbon fluttering in my bag, I felt a quiet power rooting in my bones, steady as the oaks lining our street. I wasn't just painting now. I was living, building a life that was mine, woven from courage and color, and the stubborn refusal to be forgotten. The house, the deed, the trust, they were still my secret, a card I hadn't played, but every day I grew stronger, more certain that when the moment came, I'd know how to wield them. At home, the tension had shifted from subtle to suffocating, a storm brewing in the silences between us. David and Melissa treated me like a ghost they wished would vanish. their voices sharp, their plans brazen. Melissa's brochures were gone, replaced by a new tactic, open hostility. She'd snap at me for small things, leaving a spoon in the sink, forgetting to wipe down the counter as if I were a servant who'd overstayed her welcome. David was worse in his own way. His silence is now laced with irritation, his eyes avoiding mine. One evening, as I set out my sketchbook to draw a quiet scene of Clara's roses, he stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, his jaw tight. "You're acting like you're starting over," he said, his voice low-edged with something like disdain. "It's a little late for that, don't you think, Mom?" I looked at him. My son, the boy I'd carried through nightmares and cheered through triumphs, and saw a stranger, his face closed his heart, distant. I met his eyes steady the woman from my self-portrait staring back. "It's never too late," I said, my voice calm, but firm, a quiet blade. He walked away, but I saw the flicker of unease in his face, a crack in his certainty, and it fueled me like oxygen to a flame. I began making bolder choices, each one a flag planted in my own ground, a declaration of my presence. I enrolled in a community college art class taught by a painter whose work I'd admired at the show, her abstracts bold and unapologetic. I bought a new easel, sturdy and sleek, and set it up in the living room one morning, right where Melissa spread her real estate papers, her contracts and listings now pushed aside by my canvas. She froze when she saw it, her lips tightening, her eyes flashing, but I just smiled and kept sketching my hands, steady my heart alight. I wasn't hiding anymore, not my art, not myself. I joined the gardening class's spring project, helping design a community garden at the center, where the art group met my hands digging into soil, coaxing life from seeds, my fingers stained with earth and pride. Each act was a rebellion, a way of saying, I am here, and I am not leaving. Clara and I grew closer, our friendship a tapestry of shared laughter and quiet truths. One afternoon she gave me a cutting from her favorite rose bush, a deep red bloom she called Courage, its petals vibrant against her garden's green. We planted it in my backyard near the porch where Robert and I used to sit the soil cool under our hands. "This is for you," she said, her voice thick, her hands dusted with earth. "A reminder of what you're capable of, Evelyn." I watered it daily, watching it take root, its thorns, sharp its blooms, defiant, a mirror of the strength growing inside me. I thought of my self-portrait, the woman in the garden I'd painted, and felt her taking shape within me, fierce and unyielding, her roots deep in the earth. Linda called to check in, her voice a steady anchor through the phone. She'd reviewed my finances again, suggesting I invest in something for myself, maybe a small studio, a fund for my art, a trip to see the places I'd always dreamed of. The idea felt foreign, almost selfish, but as I sat in the spare room surrounded by my canvases, the lighthouse, the woman dancing, I realized she was right. I opened a second account, transferring more of my savings, a pool of possibility that was mine alone, a promise to the woman I was becoming. It wasn't about cutting David out. It was about building a future where I could stand tall, my heart open, but my boundaries firm. One evening, something unexpected happened, a moment that cracked my heart open with hope. Liam, my younger grandson, slipped into the spare room while I was painting a quiet scene of the oak tree at the corner, its branches heavy with autumn leaves. He was 10, all skinny limbs and curious eyes, and he watched me for a long time, silent before speaking. "Can you teach me to draw, Grandma?" He asked, his voice small but earnest, his fingers twitching as if already holding a pencil. My heart surged, love and pain rushing in, and I pulled up a chair, handing him a pencil, showing him how to sketch the tree's gnarled roots. Our hands moving together on the paper, the room quiet except for the scratch of graphite and our soft breaths. It was a fleeting moment gone when Melissa called him for dinner, her voice sharp through the door, but it lingered like a star in the dark, a reminder that my grandsons weren't lost to me, not entirely. The community garden project became another spark, a place where I could give and grow. I volunteered to lead a workshop for local kids, teaching them to plant sunflowers and herbs, their small hands patting soil, their faces lit with wonder. One girl, Mia, shy and soft-spoken, clung to me, asking about every seed, every leaf. I gave her a daisy to take home its petals bright in her small fist, and she hugged me, her arms tight. "You're like my Nana," she whispered, and I went home that night and cried not from sadness but from the realization that I still had so much to offer that my heart, battered as it was, could still touch others. As spring bloomed, so did my resolve, like the courage rose unfurling in my yard. I finished the oak tree painting and hung it in the living room right above Melissa's favorite couch, its branches bold against the wall. She stared at it, her jaw tight but said nothing, her silence a small victory. I kept meeting with the art class, the book club, the gardening group, each connection a thread. In the life I was weaving a tapestry of color and strength. I wore Robert's watch every day, its ticking a heartbeat, a reminder of his faith in me, his love that never wavered, the trust, the deed, the will they were ready waiting in the spare room, a sword I'd sharpened but hadn't drawn. I didn't know when I'd need them, but I felt their weight steady and sure, like the roots of the oak I'd painted. One night I sat on the porch, the air warm with the promise of summer. The courage rose, glowing in the dusk. I thought of David's unease, Melissa's frustration, Liam's pencil in my hand. I thought of the art show, the ribbon, the woman who'd seen her grandmother in my painting, her words a gift I carried in my heart. I was no longer the woman who'd stood frozen in the kitchen, silenced by her son's cruelty. I was Evelyn Harper, painter, teacher, gardener, a woman with fire in her veins and roots in the earth. The storm was closer now, its edges sharp, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready, my heart steady, my hands strong, and as I looked at the stars, Robert's promises shining down, I knew I was building a life no one could take away. The house had become a battlefield not of shouts or slammed doors, but of silences that cut deeper than words, of glances that carried the weight of betrayal. David and Melissa's frustration was no longer veiled. It crackled in the air, sharp as static before a storm. They'd stopped pretending to include me in their plans for the house, their voices loud with certainty as they discussed renovations, realtors, and profits, as if I were already gone, a footnote in their ambitious future. One morning, I found a realtor's card on the kitchen counter, a date and time scrawled for a property assessment left there like a gauntlet thrown down. Melissa didn't bother to hide it, her eyes daring me to protest when I picked it up. "We're moving forward, Evelyn," she said, her voice cold, her arms crossed. "You should start looking at those senior homes we discussed." I looked at her, her sleek ponytail and sharper gaze, and felt a calm settle over me, steady as the ticking of Robert's watch on my wrist. "This is my home," I said, my voice soft but unyielding, a quiet fire kindling inside me. She rolled her eyes, but I saw a flicker of unease, a crack in her armor, and it told me the moment I'd been preparing for was near. That night I sat in the spare room, my sanctuary, the door locked. The courage rose, blooming in a chipped vase beside me, its red petals vivid against the soft light. I opened the folder where I kept Linda's papers, the trust, the updated will the deed, with my name in bold black ink, a promise Robert and I had sealed decades ago. I traced the letters Evelyn Harper and felt his presence, his belief in me, as steady as the watch's heartbeat. I'd been patient, building my strength through paintings and roses, through Clara's laughter and the art group's cheers. I'd waited for the right moment, and it was here. David and Melissa thought they could push me out, that I'd fade into the background of their story, a shadow they could ignore. They were wrong, and the time had come to show them. The next day, I called Linda, my voice steady, as I told her I was ready. She suggested a meeting not just with her, but with David and Melissa, to lay everything bare, to draw a line in the sand. It's not about confrontation, she said, her tone calm but resolute. It's about truth, Evelyn, about claiming what's yours. I agreed, though. My heart pounded at the thought, a mix of fear and resolve. I didn't want to hurt my son despite the wounds he'd inflicted, but I couldn't let him erase me, couldn't let Melissa's ambition steal the home Robert and I had built. I asked Clara to come with me, not to speak, but to be there, her quiet strength, a reminder of the woman I'd become. She squeezed my hand when I told her, her eyes fierce with pride. "You're doing this for you, Evelyn," she said, her voice thick. "And for every woman who's been told she's too old to matter." The meeting was set for the following week in Linda's office, a neutral space where truth could stand unbowed. I didn't tell David or Melissa the full purpose, only that we needed to discuss the house, letting them assume it was another step toward their victory. David grunted his agreement, his mind likely on the sale, while Melissa smirked, probably picturing me signing away my rights, my life packed into her boxes. I let them believe what they wanted, my silence a shield, my heart steady with purpose. I spent the days leading up to it preparing not with anger, but with clarity. I painted a bold canvas of a woman standing on a cliff, her hair wild in the wind, her face lit with defiance, the sea raging below, but unable to break her. I hung it in the living room next to the oak tree, painting a silent declaration of my strength. Ethan noticed it, his eyes wide, his voice soft. "Is that you, Grandma?" he asked, and I smiled, touching his shoulder gently. "It's all of us, sweetheart," I said, my heart aching for the boy. He could be the one I still hoped to reach. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with care, choosing the blue daisy blouse Robert's watch and a crimson scarf Clara had given me. Its color, bold as her roses. I looked in the mirror and saw the woman from my self-portrait, gray hair, loose eyes, alive with fire, standing tall in her garden. Clara drove me to Linda's office, her hand warm on mine, as we parked her presence a steady anchor. Inside, David and Melissa were already there, sitting stiffly, their faces a mix of impatience and confidence, as if they'd already won. Linda greeted us with her calm professionalism, gesturing to the conference table, her office quiet except for the soft hum of a fan. I sat across from my son, my heart aching for the boy. He'd been laughing in my arms, chasing fireflies on the porch, but my resolve was iron forged in the pain he'd caused. Linda began, her voice clear and measured, cutting through the tension like a blade. "We're here to discuss the ownership and future of the property at 214 Maple Street," she said, sliding a copy of the deed across the table, its edges crisp, my name bold and undeniable. David leaned forward, his eyes scanning the paper, then froze, his face paling as the truth sank in. My name was there alone, unchanged, since Robert and I paid off the mortgage before he was born. Melissa's fingers tightened on her purse, her lips parting in shock. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice sharp, almost shrill. "Evelyn signed the house over to us years ago. We've been clear about that." I met her eyes, calm and unflinching, the woman on the cliff staring back. "No," I said softly, my voice steady as stone. "I didn't." The room fell silent, a hush so deep it felt like the world had paused, holding its breath. Linda continued her tone, even outlining the trust I'd set up, naming me as the sole trustee with full control over the house's future. "Evelyn has also updated her will." She added, her words deliberate to reflect her wishes for her estate. She didn't elaborate, but the implication hung heavy. David and Melissa's assumptions about their inheritance were shattered, their plans crumbling like sand. David's face flushed, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking to me with something like betrayal. "Mom, what is this?" he said, his voice low, almost accusing. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We're just trying to move forward." I took a breath, my hand steady on the table, Robert's watch ticking, Clara's warmth beside me. "David, I said, my voice soft but clear, each word a step on the path I'd walked to this moment. You told me I didn't matter, that I was old in the way a burden to be discarded. But this house is mine. It's where I raised you, where your father and I built a life, brick by brick, with love and sacrifice. I've given you everything, my time, my heart, my home, and you've treated me like I'm nothing, like I don't belong in the life you're building. My eyes moved to Melissa, who looked away, her lips pressed thin, her confidence faltering. I'm not nothing, I said, my voice rising just enough to fill the room, and I'm not going anywhere. The weight of those words settled over us, heavy and final. David opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes flickering with something shame perhaps, or the dawning realization of what he'd done. Melissa started to speak, her voice sharp, but Linda cut her off, her tone firm, outlining the legal reality. The house was mine. The trust ironclad their plans to sell impossible without my consent. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry, didn't need to. I sat tall, my dignity, a shield, my strength, a quiet force that filled the room, silencing their objections, their excuses. Clara's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent cheer, and I felt Robert's presence in the watch's steady tick, his pride in me, as real as the deed before us. That evening I changed the locks, a decision made not in anger but in clarity, a line drawn to protect what was mine. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no scenes. I hired a locksmith, a kind man with gentle hands, who worked quickly, his tools clinking softly in the dusk. When David and Melissa came home, their keys didn't work, their knocks echoing on the porch, their voices rising in confusion, then frustration. I opened the door, my face calm, my heart steady despite its pounding. "You don't live here anymore," I said, my voice, even my eyes meeting theirs without flinching. "You can collect your things tomorrow, but this is my home." Melissa's face reddened, her mouth opening to argue, but David just stared, his shoulders slumping, his eyes searching mine for something he'd lost. I closed the door, the click of the new lock, a sound of finality, my hands steady, my soul at peace. The next day they moved out, taking their boxes, their plans, their assumptions. Ethan and Liam hugged me before they left, their arms tight, their faces uncertain but soft, a flicker of the boys I loved. "I'll see you soon," I whispered, pressing a kiss to their foreheads, hoping it was true, hoping time would bring them back to me. The house was quiet after they were gone, but it wasn't empty. It was mine, filled with my paintings, my roses, my memories of Robert, the life I was rebuilding. I sat on the porch that night, the courage rose, glowing in the twilight, the stars bright overhead, Robert's promises shining down. I didn't feel triumph, not exactly, just a deep, hard-won peace, a knowing that I'd faced my betrayers and stood firm, not with vengeance, but with the quiet strength of a woman who'd remembered her worth. The house felt reborn in the days after David and Melissa left, as if it had shed a heavy skin, its white clappered walls catching the summer light with a new softness. The silence was no longer oppressive, but peaceful, like the hush of a forest after rain, filled with possibility. I walked through each room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood, tracing the memories Robert and I had woven into this place, the dent in the doorframe. From David's toy bat, the window where we'd watch snow blanket the yard, the kitchen where I'd taught my son to flip pancakes, his laughter bright as morning. Those moments were mine again, untarnished by the pain of recent years, and I held them close, like heirlooms polished by time. I was 68, and for the first time in too long I felt at home, not just in these walls, but in my own heart, my own story, a woman who'd fought to reclaim herself and won. I didn't hear from David right away, and I didn't expect to the silence between us a wound that still ached, but no longer bled. His words, "Stop acting like you matter," had cut deep, but they no longer defined me. I'd given him everything, my love, my home, my years, and he'd chosen to see me as less a burden to be discarded. I couldn't force him to see me differently, but I could choose how I moved forward, how I honored the woman I'd become. Melissa sent a curt text about collecting the last of their belongings, and when they came, I stood tall, handing over boxes with a quiet dignity that silenced her usual sharpness. Ethan and Liam lingered, their eyes searching mine, their hugs tight with a warmth that cracked my heart open. "I love you, Grandma," Liam whispered, and I pressed a kiss to his forehead, whispering back, "I'm always here for you." I saw a flicker of the boys. They'd been the ones who'd curled up for my stories, and I held on to hope that time might bring them back, that love could still bridge the gap their parents had carved. Clara was my rock, her friendship a light that never wavered. The day after they moved out, she arrived with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, her grin mischievous as she stepped onto the porch, the courage rose blooming fiercely beside us. We sat in the fading light, the air warm with summer's promise, and toasted to new beginnings, the clink of our glasses a bright note in the dusk. "You did it, Evelyn," she said, her voice thick with pride, her eyes shining. "You took your life back, and you did it with grace." I laughed a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, and told her it wasn't just about the house or the deed. It was about remembering who I was, a teacher, a painter, a woman with fire in her veins and roots in the earth. She raised her glass, her smile wide. To Evelyn Harper, she said, "May she never dim again, not for anyone." We drank deeply, the wine tart and sweet, and I felt the truth of her words settle in my bones, a vow I'd keep for the rest of my days. I threw myself into my art with a passion that felt like rediscovery, as if I'd unlocked a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. The spare room was now a true studio, its walls alive with canvases, storms that roared, gardens that bloomed, women who danced under starry skies, their faces fierce with joy. I started teaching again, not in a classroom, but at the community center, offering free art classes for kids like Mia, the girl who'd called me her Nana, her shy smile a gift that warmed me through. Watching them dip brushes into paint, their faces glowing with wonder, brought me back to my teaching days, to the joy of guiding young hearts toward their own light. I painted for myself too, entering more shows, selling pieces to strangers who saw their own stories in my colors, their words of praise, a reminder that my voice could still resonate, could still touch the world. The community garden flourished, its sunflowers towering over rows of herbs, their golden petals a beacon of hope. I spent mornings there, my hands in the soil, teaching kids and neighbors how to nurture life, how to trust in growth even after hard seasons. Clara and I planted a new rose bush, this one white, its blooms soft and radiant, a symbol of peace. I thought of Robert, often his watch still ticking on my wrist, his journal now filled with my own notes, sketches of roses, dreams of new paintings, promises to myself to keep living, keep creating. I didn't need to visit his grave anymore. He was with me in every brushstroke, every seed, every step I took toward joy, his love, a steady current beneath my days. I made a decision about Robert's watch, one that felt right, like a circle closing. The community center was planning a fundraiser to keep its programs free for kids who needed them, a cause that echoed my own journey of rediscovery. I donated the watch, not as a relic to be locked away, but as a symbol of resilience to be auctioned for a purpose that gave others hope. At the event, I watched a young mother bid on it, her eyes bright with determination, her hand raised with quiet strength. When she won, she came to me, tears glistening, and said, "I'll wear it to remember what I'm capable of, what we're all capable of." I hugged her, my heart full, knowing Robert would have smiled, his carpenter's hands clapping in approval, his love alive in that moment. David reached out a month later, his call unexpected, his voice softer, less certain, like a man standing at the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I agreed, not because I owed him, but because I wanted to, because love, even wounded, doesn't vanish. We met at a cafe, neutral ground, the air thick with the scent of coffee and possibility. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders heavy with something like regret. He apologized haltingly for what he'd said, for how he'd treated me, his words stumbling but sincere. He didn't ask to come back, didn't mention the house, and I didn't offer. I listened, my heart open, but guarded the woman from my self-portrait steady within me. "I love you, David," I said, my voice soft but firm, but I needed to love myself too. "I hope you understand that one day." He nodded, his eyes wet, and for the first time I saw a glimpse of the boy I'd raised, the one who'd chased fireflies with me. I didn't forgive him fully, not yet, but I left the door ajar, trusting time to do what words couldn't. I planted a tree that sprang a dogwood with delicate white blooms, its branches reaching for the sky in my backyard, a symbol of renewal of roots that endure. As I patted the soil around it, the earth cool under my hands, I thought of the women who'd carried me. Clara with her roses, Ruth with her encouragement, Marjorie with her fierce portrait, the stranger at the art show, who'd seen her grandmother in my work. I thought of you, the women watching this who might feel discarded, unseen, told you're too old to shine, too broken to matter. I want you to know something, a truth I learned through tears, and paint through a deed I refused to surrender, and a rose that bloomed despite the storm. Your worth isn't measured by who accepts you, by who stays, or who leaves by the boxes they try to pack you into. It's measured by how you choose to honor yourself, by the gardens you plant, the stories you tell, the life you build with your own hands, your own heart. I'm Evelyn Harper, and I'm still here painting storms and sunflowers, teaching kids to see their own light, growing roses that defy the frost. The dogwood blooms outside my window, its petals soft against the dawn, and every morning I step onto my porch, the courage rose at my side, and breathe in a world that's mine. You can do the same. Find your spark, your deed, your truth. Whether it's a canvas, a garden, or a quiet vow to yourself, hold it tight, nurture it, and don't let anyone tell you it's too late to bloom. The stars are still shining, promising tomorrow, and you are enough just as you are.